Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. This is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and I'm the Senior Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Case. It's great to be with you again. All right, so hear the music here. I want you to picture this. You're cruising down a winding road in the heart of rural Alabama. The sun is setting over endless fields of green. The windows are rolled down. The sound of crickets fill the air as you pass by old wooden barns, and there's friendly waves from neighbors on their porches. It's a scene straight out of a country song, isn't it? It's a perfect blend of peace and simplicity. And today, we're taking you on a special journey to Greensboro, Alabama, which is the home of the Horseshoe Farm Community Health Project. This incredible initiative is more than just a community service program. It's really a lifeline for the underserved. And from providing mentorship and healthcare support to fostering a sense of belonging, Horseshoe Farm is dedicated to empowering individuals and really strengthening the community. So as we explore this unique project and the profound impact that it's having on rural healthcare, we'll dive into the heart of what makes this community so special. So let me tell you about my guest. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. John Dorsey. Dr. Dorsey is the founder and executive director of Project Horseshoe Farm, and a really remarkable initiative that serves communities in need. He has an impressive educational background. He earned his BA in neurosciences from Pomona College, his MD from Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, and an MBA with a focus on health and medical services administration from Widener University. Dr. Dorsey completed his residency in psychiatry at the University of California, Davis Medical Center, where he was honored with the Outstanding Resident Award and the Resident Medical Staff Outstanding Teaching Award by UC Davis medical students. In addition to his work with Project Horseshoe Farm, Dr. Dorsey maintains a clinical practice at Hale County Hospital and Colonial Haven Nursing Home. He also serves on the board of directors at Hale County Hospital and is an adjunct clinical faculty member at the University of Alabama School of Medicine. Dr. Dorsey brings a wealth of experience and passion for community service to our discussion today. So let's just dive right into our conversation with Dr. Dorsey. Enjoy. Hi, Dr. Dorsey. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Christian. How are you? First of all, just please call me John, but it's just great to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. And so thanks, John. The backstory is to listeners, like you reached out to me and said, hey, I've got this program that I think pre-meds who've been working in my program told me about your podcast. And would you want to talk about it? I said, this sounds great. And then this fast forward, we scheduled a date, and you and I happened to be at the same conference a couple weeks ago for pre-health advisors. And so I'm walking with Dr. Maida, my dean, and she has these papers, and she's like, I just ran into the most interesting guy. He's got this program called Horseshoe Farms, and one of our students actually. I'm like, wait, what? And I said, what's it called? She says, Horseshoe Farms. I'm like, that guy's going to be on my podcast in like 2 weeks. She's like, no way. So I said, where is he? And she pointed over here, and I ran over to you, and I'm like, hey, you're my podcast. And we've never met before. You didn't know what I look like.
We give each other a big hug. We're like, we haven't met, but we're going to meet now, right? So
you're like, all right, see you July 12th. So that's the backstory of like how you and I got connected. But I'm so grateful that you reached out because I think after I did some homework and read through the materials about your program, it does deserve some conversation. And I think pre-med listeners will find it interesting and hopefully take a closer look at your program. So it's called Horseshoe Farms Community Health. And give us a little background. I mean, you're a community psychiatrist from Orange County, and now you're in Alabama. Talk a little bit about the background of this project.
Yeah, no, it's funny. So I grew up in Orange County, and if you had asked my family and my friends, would I be practicing psychiatry in rural Alabama when I was in either college or high school, I think nobody would have guessed it. But I think the seeds of Horseshoe Farm really started to come up when I was a third year medical student. And I just remember going through my rotations, my clinical rotations, and observing like all these doctors, nurses, medical students, residents, everybody on the provider side working really hard and doing what we were supposed to be doing. And everybody always seemed angry and frustrated. And then looking at patients, and they always seemed angry and frustrated. And I was like, I couldn't really put that together in my mind. I was just having a hard time. What's going on? Why are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? And it just seems to be not working. And ended up doing my residency in something called community psychiatry that you mentioned. And really, for the listeners who don't know what community psychiatry is, it's really a branch of psychiatry that focuses on people who are struggling in lots of different ways, people who are in and out of institutional settings, people who are struggling with relational difficulties, struggling with homelessness, legal issues. So it's really taking care of people who struggle in a lot of ways. And I was really drawn to that sort of work, but it kind of crystallized to me when I was taking care of so many patients like that in my residency, that so many patients we take care of in the healthcare system, whether it's in the ER settings or family medicine settings or hospital settings, have a lot more in common with the patients I was taking care of in a community psychiatry setting than this assumption that I think the healthcare system starts with, that people come to you with discrete illness with all other aspects of their lives put together. And that really is where sort of that mismatch sort of crystallized. And so I had wanted to sort of develop a system that actually made sense for the bulk of patients that we were taking care of, but also always had an interest in sort of medical education and teaching, and thought that there would be students who not only were interested in reading about sort of the social determinants of health, but also wanted to see how that looked in practice. So that's really the origins of Horseshoe Farm, was putting those two pieces together, was involving young people who were recent college graduates to not only learn about, but help develop systems and apply sort of approaches that made sense for the bulk of patients that I think we see within psychiatry, but I think more broadly within healthcare.
So how from California to rural Alabama?
So that's actually a good story. So I went to medical school in Philadelphia and then went back and did my residency at UC Davis up in Northern California. And part of me was thinking I would just come back to Southern California and start practicing. And I was very, very happy. I moved to Southern California. I got a really good job at Loma Linda University at the Med Center there, and was practicing, doing a really neat program out there. But I think there's part of me, even going back to my childhood, my dad's from a small town in West Virginia. And I think even when I was a kid, he sort of said, hey, I always see you developing into sort of a small town family medicine doctor. Because I think the things that drew me to medicine were the relational aspects and sort of the personal aspects of medicine. And I think that that's always been part of who I am. And so I had this sort of sense that living in this giant place in this sort of, in more of an industrial sort of model of healthcare may not be the best match for me. And so I started kicking around the idea of maybe I could move to a smaller place and practice in a more personal way. But I actually ended up running into a person who became a good friend of mine at a conference in San Diego. And he was from Jackson, Alabama. And I started asking him, I said, hey, I'm thinking about moving to a small town. And does that make any sense? And he's like, yeah, John, Alabama invented small towns. If you want to come check it out, this is a place for you. So I said, all right, what the heck? And I started to set up interviews, got a job. I actually had a decent plan at the time, or maybe a practical plan. I got a job at the State Psychiatric Hospital in Tuscaloosa, which is where the University of Alabama is. And I agreed to a part-time job that would get my feet on the ground and get me a chance to know the state a little bit and maybe find a small town. Driving cross country, I get a call in Oklahoma from the administrator of the hospital and said, we no longer need your services.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, man, oh, man, that's the whole reason I'm going.
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, well, we found somebody who wants to work full time. So I was like, oh, my gosh, I can't go back to California. Do I stay in Oklahoma? Ended up pushing forward. It was actually turned out to be right in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So housing was expensive. Everything was just chaotic. just the whole situation, it almost feels dreamlike back then. But I got there, and my first job was to figure out where the heck was I going to live.
Yeah.
And so I started to explore day after day and found a mobile home sales office and went in and asked them if they'd rent me a trailer and they were like looking at me and looked at my California license plate and like, what in the world are you doing in Alabama? And they grilled me for about an hour. I'm sweating. And after about an hour of grilling, they go, you need to go to Greensboro. I'd never been to Greensboro, Alabama, and ended up in the catfish capital of Alabama. And people were welcoming. It was this really charming sort of small southern town. They didn't have a psychiatrist. They helped me to find housing. And I was like, this maybe is a sign that this is where I'm supposed to get started. Just settled in roots there. And that was in 2005. So 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like that old movie Doc Hollywood with Michael J. Fox.
It's sort of bizarrely. I mean, it is. There's another people like my fellows tell us, our top fellows tell us about Northern Exposure, I think is another that people are like, so yeah. I don't know, but yeah, there seems to be this theme of people ending up in rural towns. Yeah,
what a story. What a story.
Grateful.
And haven't left 2005, almost 20 years. Yeah. So talk a little bit about, for those that are listening, may not be familiar with what is community health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's something that I think broadly a lot of people are wrestling with right now is what makes up community health. And I don't know that there's a simple or easy answer to that. But I think if you talk broadly with a lot of people in healthcare and education and they're saying that there's something seems to be happening in our world where our social connections and our connections of community seem to be straining and fraying. It's kind of interesting because I think there's almost two related questions. What is community health? So that kind of gives you the aim of what we can do. And then what is it that we should be doing to promote community health are kind of tied together. Mm. And I guess Horseshoe Farm has taken the approach that the way in which we connect and relate to our vulnerable neighbors is a really important underpinning to almost anything in community health. So if you look, there's almost so many people can give so many definitions of community health. It's hard to imagine any definition of community health that doesn't involve the well-being and how people in the community take care of children. Mm-hmm. It's also really hard to imagine any definition of community health that doesn't involve taking care of and looking after our vulnerable neighbors, elderly people mm-hmm. with mental illness. It doesn't seem like there's almost any definition of community health that doesn't involve how it is that we're tied together as neighbors and how the level of trust and the way in which we treat and see one another in a physical proximity sense. I think those dimensions kind of fit. And then maybe looking at the next level is how healthy are the institutional structures that support those activities might be another way of looking at it. And I kind of to your point, I think that kind of transcends rural versus urban, like even in a big urban environment, you have neighborhoods or sort of subunits that are mm-hmm. organized around some sort of healthcare system, some sort of education or youth support system, some sort of transportation system, community centers, those kind of, and the health of those things seems to relate or at least correlate really strongly with what community health is. And so we kind of look at that and then say, what can we do as an organization to both teach emerging community health leaders about that, but also have them contribute to community health in that way?
Yeah, I was thinking, I guess, more structurally, but as you were talking, there's the human connection with each other and taking care of one another. And it makes me think, have you ever heard of the Blue Zones? There's a author. Totally. And yeah, like in those communities, the Blue Zones are more about like the diet, but broadly, it's about taking care of the elderly and the children and how those people, they have, if you're not familiar with Blue Zones, it's people that have a much longer life than others, and they're trying to figure out why these people, like in Loma Linda's was one of them.
That's what I was going to say. Loma Linda is one of the Blue Zones,
and why they have a longer life span than other communities. And so it's community, it's diet, it's taking care, it's positivity, it's all those things.
The one big thing that cut across, and they looked at all the blue zones and they said, well, what are the things that cut across all of these? And they said dietary factors were a key factor. Connection and relationship was a huge, how do people relate to one another? And I think that's starting to emerge. And that's, I think, where Horseshoe Farm is really looking at the social and relational level of healthcare. Like if I take a group of patients, let's say I see 15 patients in my psychiatric practice, and they're struggling in ways that are just hard to imagine: financial, transportation, chaotic, abusive relationships, traumatic past, difficulty with housing. So struggles that are hard for me to even imagine. And I'll ask them, I'll say, how many people in your life do you have who you can turn to, who you can just talk about what you're going through? And probably anywhere from 50% to 2/3 will say they have 0 people in their lives that they can trust to confide in and who can provide emotional support and social support, because either the person's going to gossip about it or they're going to use the information against them, or they have no strong relationship. So they're carrying this heavier load than their share, and they're doing it in isolation. And that's one of the key themes that I think cuts across all the programs of Horseshoe Farm, is reasserting the importance of social, caring, consistent relationships as a true factor in promoting health and sort of quality of life, especially for our vulnerable neighbors.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about how did it go from concept to becoming what Horseshoe Farm Community Health, the gap year opportunity is?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So the first step, I kind of had some rough ideas in the back of my mind, but I spent the first couple of years here in Greensboro just practicing psychiatry, which is nice because I think so often people will come to communities and want to make change. And I think it really is healthy to spend a couple of years to just learn and be accepted and build trust and learn about values. So that, I think, was a healthy beginning rather than sort of jumping headlong and say, hey, I'm going to start this thing. And one of the things that started to happen, because there were no other psychiatrists in the community, was people started to approach me and say, do you see children? And I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to turn into a full-time child psychiatry practice. And during residency, I felt like you were kind of hamstrung a little bit with sort of, you'd see kids come in and they clearly had difficulties and challenges, but your choice was prescribe a medicine or not prescribe a medicine. And I just felt like that was clearly, there's kids who do need medicines at times, but it just seemed so limiting. And so I said, all right, there's clearly a need here, but how do we respond in a way that may not be just that? And so I approached the principal at the local elementary school, who was gracious to allow us space and sort of say, let's start an after school program. And then approached the University of Alabama and had some honors college students and social work students who came down and volunteered. And we started and said, hey, let's start something that provides mentorship, academic support, emotional and social support. And that was kind of the beginnings. And so it kind of goes back to the definition of community health. You're like, what is a psychiatrist doing, trying to help kids as a starting point? But really, if you look at community health, that is, I think, really one of the natural starting points is how do you support children in a community? And what happened was we were starting to think, well, hey, the students are driving down, but they're only down here half a day a week. And sometimes they're not showing up because they have other things or they have a test. And it didn't feel fully connected to the community. And I thought, maybe if we dove deeper and had it be a fully immersive experience where you didn't have all your other academic requirements and other things, but really could dive deep into the service work, but really be a part of the community and live in the community, that we could really get to where we were going. And that's where the idea for the fellowship started. So first year we had 3 fellows who somehow convinced their parents that'd be a good idea to go to Greensboro, Alabama, to a nonprofit organization that had no track record and they didn't know what they were going to be doing. So I always thank the first class of fellows for taking that chance and making that dive. They were the true adventurous spirits, and just kind of year to year have grown out from there. But that's kind of how we got started.
That's amazing. So how does it work? So you just kind of alluded to that now it's a developed program. The fellows are, and there's fellows and interns. I want to talk about that in a moment. But how does it work now? So what's a fellow do? What can they expect to? What's the immersive experience, and what are their responsibilities?
Yeah, so I think we talk about it about like the 6 pillars of Horseshoe Farm. So there's 4 service pillars. There's the fellowship, the educational and leadership development component for the fellows and the interns. And then there's the broader community pillar. So if you look at the 4 service pillars, is we work with kids either in after school programs or in school support for teachers in the classroom to provide small group mentoring, relational support, academic support to kids. So that's pillar number 1, service pillar number 1. Service pillar number 2 is kind of our signature program. It's called the Health Partners Program. So each fellow is paired with anywhere from 7 to 10 patients or people who are either elderly, isolated, struggling with mental illness, struggling with multiple chronic illnesses, and really could benefit from a healthy, caring, consistent relationship in their life. And that's the foundational aspect, is really building that relationship and bringing that to that person. And if they just do that, that to me is a success. But then on top of that, once that trust is built, they can help them and take them for walks and attend their doctor's appointments with them, kind of helping them to successfully navigate the healthcare and the social services system. They can encourage them to eat healthier, make changes in their diet. They can provide some basic local transportation, kind of looking at those social determinants of health. But really the foundation is the healthy, caring relationship. The third service program is community center program. So we have the fellows help to lead and run and volunteer in senior programs or community center programs for adults with mental illness, adults with chronic illness, or otherwise isolated or vulnerable adults. And that's something that I think the fellows really enjoy. We have walking clubs, we have music groups, choir groups, bingo, those sorts of things. And then the fourth area is we volunteer really looking at the importance of the overlap between housing and healthcare. We have a housing program for women living with mental illness in Greensboro, but in our other sites, they volunteer in nursing homes to really provide support to people who don't have a lot of family or don't get that connection, and help with sort of activities with a volunteer director at the local nursing home. So my hope is that they get a sort of a broad view of different ways in which you can sort of make impact within the community while working with the community to strengthen the existing structures.
It's amazing. And so I have to believe that you provide the support, like they're in a kind of an extension of you. You're doing some training with them and helping them understand kind of what their role responsibilities are, and the skills they kind of can think about working into, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. So we haven't mentioned yet that we have 3 sites now. So we started in Greensboro, and then it started to grow over 6-7 years. And then about 6 years ago, we launched a second site in Marion, Alabama, in Perry County, which is about 30 minutes away. And then a third site about 5 years ago in Pomona, California, just to see, kind of to our point earlier, it can work in a rural place, can work in a more urban place. And all 3 sites are fantastic. I kind of use as a test. Would I want to be a fellow in any of these sites? And I'm like, heck yeah, I get enthusiastic. Each time I go visit each one of the sites, I'm like, man, I wish I were here. Man, I wish I were here. Man, I wish. And then we have a site director at each site who provides really mentorship and teaching and ongoing support for the fellows. And they're fantastic. I think just the fellows love their site directors. I think the site directors truly love and care and support. And we also have an ongoing curriculum. So there's a reflective component. So our educational philosophy starts with action and activity and experience, but it really is important that we have a reflective component so that you can sort of see the meaning of it and also see how it fits within the broader context of healthcare, community health, and kind of see the relationships and build that out. So
I think that's really important. It's just not just going through the process and doing, but consciously asking students to pause and reflect. And it's one theme that people have been listening to this and talking with physicians and directors and deans. It's like we're always emphasizing the self-reflections, like to pause and understand what you've been doing and how you've grown from it or what you've taken away from it, and not just checking boxes or just going through the actions. That's fantastic.
That's so true. I think that in one way is maybe one of the most distinguishing, besides the broadness and the integrative aspect of Horseshoe Farm, is that whereas AmeriCorps and other places do good service, but they're plugged into sort of community organizations, and we are explicitly and actually maybe starting point an educational nonprofit that is the core. Like people have said, what impact has Horseshoe Farm had. And I think it's just amazing what we've sort of been able to do with folks in the community. But if you look at it, maybe our biggest impact is going to be, at this point, we have 190 graduates from our fellowship program since 2009. And they're taking leadership positions all over the country in academic medicine and public health and sort of policy work and healthcare administration that we really take seriously, that it's designed into the program, that we are an educational and leadership development program. So the service is only part of that, exactly to your point of what education looks like.
That's a little bit of an incubator for leadership development. And that's fantastic. So you talked a little bit about, I think, what makes it unique. You just mentioned kind of compared to some other opportunities that people have access to. Can you expand a little bit upon who might enjoy this kind of experience?
I think we've kind of gotten a pretty good sense over the years, like the types of students who really, people who really enjoy the relational aspects and are drawn to sort of the interpersonal and the relational aspects of service. I think they tend to be really happy to be able to get out of maybe the academic bubble and really work closely with people. I think that's a theme that cuts across all of our programs is relationships. So if you like that and like working with people, both through your service, but also engagement with the community, those are people, I think, in terms of people who tend to be broad and integrative thinkers, who maybe don't want to just do one thing over and over and over again, but really want to sort of see connections more broadly, I think are drawn. So those people tend to be interested in public health, into maybe anthropology. We have a lot of neurosciences majors, pre-meds. I'd say probably 70% of our fellows are going on or seeking to go to medical school, probably 20% go into public health, 10% into education or other areas. But I think those tend to be the types of people that can be good matches and really appeals to. Yeah.
It's mainly a gap year project, but you kind of mentioned to me that there are some opportunities for undergraduate students that they don't have to wait till that point. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the fellowship is a 13-month gap year program. So and you really take this deep and immersive dive into the sort of community and all the aspects of Horseshoe Farm. But if you wanted to get sort of just a taste of it and kind of still get a feel for it, but maybe not take as deep of a dive, we offer internship programs for undergrads and also master's students in public health or other areas who can spend anywhere from a month to 6 months or even 12 months with us. So typically it's a month to 3 months with us. And I think you really can get a pretty good feel for things. Actually, some of our interns end up wanting to be fellows because they do want to take a deeper dive. The nice thing is for the fellowship, we provide housing and an educational grant. So our goal really is so that you're not having to take on further debt, and that you're supported and you can make it through the year. You're not going to be living in luxury, but you have your housing taken care of, but you're not going to have to take hopefully loans or other things to make it through the year. For our interns, we also provide free housing. And if they bring their cars down, we provide a small educational grant to help support their of gas and automotive costs while they're down here.
Wow. That's really very thoughtful. And I can tell you really thought all the sometimes the unintended consequences of some programs, and it's like there's the benefits, but then it comes at a cost. And so you've tried to mitigate some of those additional costs because as somebody who's gone through medical school, that the process of what an education can cost down the road and that kind of thing. So I think that's wonderful. How about medical students and residents? Do you have you have something for them?
Yeah, so we've worked with sort of a variety of health professions, sort of medical students, PA students, nursing students. In Greensboro, I still practice. I see patients in our outpatient clinic 2 days a week, and in a local nursing home a half day a week. Actually on the board of the hospital, local small community hospital, and we really want for the fellows, I think. We want them to sort of see outside of the clinic setting and then see it through the patient's perspective and then get that view, but also then take their health partners to the doctor. So they're seeing it from that vantage point. And then as a medical student or a nursing student to see it from the hospital setting or a clinic setting, and then move out to the sort of the community. So you're seeing in both directions. So we have elective opportunities for fourth year medical students who can do roughly a third of their time would be doing psychiatry / family medicine / ER / inpatient. So you're getting, after you've done all your core clinical rotations, you're getting a comprehensive view of the health system. And then they'd spend roughly 20% of their time working with our hospital administration leadership, learning about the different aspects of how a hospital and health system run. It's something I learned was really valuable to me when I was in medical school. I was getting my MBA, and it was just one of the most valuable things that I did. And then they would spend the remaining 40% of their time out working with the fellows on these various community health initiatives. So that's I think a nice opportunity. And it's also been really nice. We've had fellows who've come back in their fourth year and come back and say, hey, now I'm a medical student and I want to see it.
That's crazy.
So
that's awesome. That's awesome. So you talked a little bit about, just to kind of winding down here, but like, what kind of impact are you seeing in these communities? And you've talked about like what you've seen from the graduates, but what have been the positive impacts you've seen in these 3 sites?
I think it's been really interesting. I think we can certainly do a better job of measuring, and because we've been so focused on the service orientation, and I'm not a researcher, that hasn't been a focus of what we've done so far. But right now, I really feel like we're at that stage where we can actually give more rigorous measure. So we're working with the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and their research team to really look more deeply. Anecdotally, it's off the charts. Like,
that's awesome. Yeah.
So if I actually was talking with the fellows this morning, I said, if you were to come back 3 years from now and say, is Horseshoe Farm being successful? How would you know? Or how would you know we're not being successful? And they all kind of saw it. Like, when I go out to a site, I walk into the nursing home and I see, how does the sort of director of the nursing home respond to me? And if they light up and all the patients light up and sort of all the staff light up, and that same thing at the community center and the school are saying, and that's what we get. Almost, we have a list of quotes on our website of sort of what people's and their typical responses to say, this has been transformative for my child. This has been transformative for me as a person. And these aren't kind of isolated quotes. The good thing about what we're doing is, whereas if I had prescribed a medicine, let's say if I get 1 in 3 success rate with an antidepressant, that would be wonderful, or even 50%, that would be fantastic. Or there's no situation where providing a healthy, caring, consistent relationship doesn't yield some positive, and oftentimes transformatively positive. So it's just win-win in every direction. So the people we serve, we look at the institutions we partner with. Are they happy with it? And they're overwhelmingly happy. And then we look at the fellows and interns and say, has this been a valuable experience? That's where we've actually tracked it the strongest, like year-to-year, year-end surveys. I think between 92 and 97% would agree or strongly agree that this was one of the better experiences that they've ever had, and that they would recommend it to other people, and that they made a good decision doing it. And for prospective applicants who are looking at it, we say we want to be 100% transparent, set up a call with any of the fellows, and we tell them to share what their experience has been like. And I think you'll get a sense for what kind of impact it's having on them, and also the people we serve and the communities we work with.
Yeah. You're making an impact in the human connection, and that's it. And sometimes it's hard to measure, probably. But that I can tell by your passion and enthusiasm that there's something happening in those communities, and maybe you're building blue zones in Marion and Green.
Moving towards trying to inch our way in that direction, I think. Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. But let me, you said there's an application process. Does everybody start at the same time? Is it like, so what does that calendar kind of look like? You said it was 13 months. What's the time frame? When does it begin?
Yeah, so the fellowship, actually everybody starts the same time and ends. So they arrive, each class of fellows arrives, I think, late June, and then they stay through first part of July the next year. So it's like roughly 12 and a half months. We do that so that people can graduate, get a couple weeks under their belt, get a deep breath, and then come down here, and then hopefully have a week or two before they start medical school or grad school at the other end. For the internship, it really can be it's staggered throughout the year. So it's just based on whether we have available spots and housing for people. So in terms of the application process. We're thinking about, last year we had 2 application deadlines. We're thinking about maybe doing even a third one, an earlier one. Roughly, it looks like we're going to be doing for the fellowship September, and then late October, and then in February. So for people who want to kind of get their year, know what they're doing early on, get that hammered down, you can apply early. If you're sort of still thinking about it, waiting till later. Interns, we kind of have rolling admissions, just kind of inquire and just ask about the time you're looking for and see if we have available spots.
Oh, that's great. And then lastly, why Horseshoe Farm? Is there a farm?
We have no horses and no farm. It was weird when we were starting the organization. One of our board members who was working with me to kind of get it off the ground, we were just kind of dreaming about what it would look like. She was like, John, we have to figure out a name for this. And I'm like, oh man, I hadn't even thought of that. And we're like, well, what is it? What is it we're doing? Does it fit in a category? And we kind of both looked at each other and said, it doesn't fit neatly into sort of any category. And we didn't want to sort of pigeonhole it. And so we were working to identify the first housing program that we had for women living with mental illness. And it was actually on a dirt road called Horseshoe Bend. And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, that seems to be authentic to the community, seems to be grassroots, seems to draw from our rural roots, and maybe we're a farm system for the next generation of community health leaders. So that's where the name comes from. I'll tell you a funny story. So we were working with kids, and this was probably our first year where we had the name and everything. And this little girl comes up to me and she goes, Dr. John, when do we get to ride the horses? And I was like, oh my gosh, she's been in it 6 months. She's not really been coming for the tutoring or the mentor. She's been like doing this all to get the horses. So I was like, we got to be a little bit clearer about no horses and no farm. So
where are the horsies? Oh, geez, that's great. Well, let me tell you, this has been great. Thank you for sharing all this with me. And I have to think that the people that are listening, I bet this was resonating with quite a few listeners, and they're piquing their interest too. And I have to tell you what I'm hearing on my end from a missions perspective, that this program, I think, can provide somebody from an application perspective, but also from growth and exposure and experiences. And I was jotting down some things. It's just like you're interacting with diverse patient populations. You mentioned elderly and children, those that are vulnerable. They're getting to see through somebody else's experience what social determinants of health actually are, and environmental and behavioral barriers for people to access to healthcare. I wrote down, so you're also seeing direct patient care. Like you said, they accompany them to their visits with physicians. And so you're experiencing that. Growing communication skills is something I wrote down. Like, how do you communicate with somebody who's maybe in their early 90s or their children, or there's some, different background. So you're growing these communication skills. I wrote down, you're understanding what empathy is and how to demonstrate that and what that looks like, to hear their stories, to understand their plight. That's empathy. I think the students will learn what that looks like and feels like, and how to demonstrate that and feel it. I wrote down, you can understand the stress that's on the current healthcare system. You're seeing what that looks like. You see what outreach and how it can make an impact in a community setting. You understand what community health is. We talked about that earlier. I wrote down, you're also going outside your comfort zone. I mean, if you're from, again, pick any large metropolitan area and you're dropped in rural Alabama, I think you've gone outside your comfort zone. And I think the last one, and I'm sure there's many, many more, but as we were talking, I wrote leadership development. That was one of your pillars or your principles of the program, and to understand building some leadership skills and what it means to be a leader or to grow into a leader, and understanding, what that looks like. And I'd love to hear sometime, maybe on the side, we can talk about what that leadership development looks like. But that is definitely clearly that your graduates seem to have gone on to maybe some things that started growing at the farm.
No, just extraordinary. I mean, I think that really does encapsulate it, and just really, really grateful. I mean, that's one of the challenges is I think we have a really good program, but just the awareness, and I think just exposing it to people and students who have that alignment. And I think when you listen and if it clicks with you, but it's just really having that opportunity. It's just really grateful to you for helping us to share the word a little bit.
You're welcome. I think you have to be an adventurer a little bit. You gotta be ready for an adventure. And it sounds like a fun ride, man. And if I was in that position, I think I'd be looking very closely at this, because it sounds like a fun and engaging and inspiring group of people to be around. So I'll put links to all your website and all the other things in the show description, so people can dig into it. Probably share your contact information if they want to reach out directly. John, is there anything else we haven't talked about or touched on regarding your project?
No, I mean, it's been a delight. Thank you, Christian. And just really neat. I mean, a story about how we met. And it's just been really cool to connect and even talk before. But yeah, just grateful again for the opportunity to sort of talk with you and also share with your listeners. So thank you. Yeah,
you're welcome. It's been a real pleasure. So, hey, listen, I guess I'll see you at the next conference then.
That's right. Next year, do you know where it's at? Do you know where we are?
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it.
All right. Well, hey, good to see you. And we'll catch up again sometime.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate it.
Hey, don't leave just yet. Listen, wasn't that great? What a great conversation. Dr. Dorsey's a super cool guy. Listen, if you like what you've heard, help me out. Leave a review, hit some stars. The algorithm will find the person that's scrolling through and trying to look for different podcasts about premedical kind of stuff. So help me out there. Listen, coming up, I have some med schools I'm interviewing. So hang in there. I'll be back with you guys as soon as I can. Take care. Thanks.